Hey folks, Fernando doing another video for the Modern Survivalist, and in this case answering some questions regarding Glock knives. I did a video, I think it was last year, about identifying an original Glock knife, given that there is a fair amount of counterfeits out there in the market. I also got a question regarding the edge. How sharp should your Glock knife be? Is this an indication of it being counterfeit or not? Well, let's get to it. First of all, the basics on how to identify a Glock knife. You will mostly look at the marking. Yes, it should say Glock, as it says there, made in Austria. Let me change the angle there. Okay, so made in Austria. These are made in Austria. This is a Glock model 78, right? Model 78 is the one without the serrations, and the model 81 is the one that does have those serrations. Okay, Glock 81, make sure that matches. If you have one that says 81 and hasn't got the serrations, you're looking at a counterfeit. But most of all, the marking. It will have the marking of Glock in the blade itself. It will have the marking here in the grip, and it will have the marking also here in the sheath. If it's missing any of these markings, it's not an original Glock knife. Usually they are injected, molded, injected on this side, so you see this on pretty much all of these, right? You see that the mark is always in that same spot, and that's basically how you see if the knife is original or not. Keep in mind, these are military knives. They're intended for military use, mostly as a bayonet knife. So it has a cap here on the back, and it has a metal tube so as to be used as a bayonet. Now, this does not go all the way through. It's just a metal tube, and then the narrow tank comes about there. It doesn't go too far. It's not all the way through, and a metal piece, just separate pieces of metal here in the knife. Now, why is it important to identify if it's an original Glock knife or not? Well, you of course want to buy the real thing. So if you're paying for an original Glock knife, which shouldn't be all that expensive. That's one of the advantages of the Glock knife, is that it's quite affordable. I did a video calling this maybe the best survival knife there is. That is, of course, keeping in mind the context of the price and how cheap it is for you to have a few in your different kits and bags, and how in terms of a functional blade is as basic and as effective as it gets. Intended as a fighting knife, of course, the typical dagger shape. Intended as a beater that will take a lot of abuse, yes, also that's one of the biggest advantages that it has. Now, it's capable of taking a beating because it's been designed and manufactured in a certain way, which if you're talking about a counterfeit or fake Glock knife, it may not be the case. And this is more important in the Glock knife than in any other knife, mostly because of how it's been designed so as to take a lot of abuse, making use of the right steel and metallurgy in terms of the treatment that it has. This is a 1095 blade, right? And yes, 1095 is a fairly common steel, especially in survival knives, mostly because it's very cheap. Here I have a Schrade 1095 knife. Now, the difference is that the Glock knife, being designed as a bayonet, is heated to 55 Rockwell. 55 is actually a lot less than what most knife manufacturers these days are comfortable with, because marketing says that your blade should be no less than 57, 58 Rockwell. If not, it is just too soft. That is, of course, bullshit. It hasn't been that way before. Back in the day when our grandfathers would use knives, they would pick up a knife that was maybe 55 Rockwell, and they would see, this is perfectly fine. It holds an edge very well. They were not obsessing over this stupid idea of, yes, it has to be a mega steel with 65 Rockwell, diamond cutting knife, which it just doesn't make any sense, right? Especially for something that is a tool that you're going to be using it. Sure, it's nice to have nice steels, and I have plenty of those myself, but this idea of obsessing over a knife being or a steel being too soft, that is quite ridiculous. Unless you're using that thing all the time and you're really cutting some kind of very abrasive material, and that's a thing for you. But for example, this Glock knife, which is one of my most used knives, and keep in mind, I have hundreds of knives. I have designed my own knife made out of better steel, and this is the one that I designed myself, made by Aitor. This is a fantastic knife, sure. This is still the one that I use the most. Why? Because it's a beater for me. I'm not worrying about, you know, messing it up or even losing it. Now, if I lose my Aitor knife, even though I have a few of these myself, yeah, that's not going to be pleasant. Sure, this is a beast. This is a beast of a knife. It's going to be holding an edge longer, and it's, you know, tough as nails, especially given how much steel you have. But this, it's about the price. It's about how lightweight it is. It's about how functional and minimalistic, yet achieving what you want in a good knife. All of that, it's here. But if you buy a counterfeit, you may end up with a blade that looks exactly like it, but maybe the steel is not the same, and most of all, guys, maybe the heat treatment is not the same. This Chinese manufacturer, without having a freaking clue what I'm talking about here, makes the 1095 blade heat treated with a rest, and you end up having a Glock knife copy with a blade that is maybe 58, 59, 60 Rockwell hardness. Who knows? There's quite a bit of variation sometimes. This same knife made with a less than stellar control in terms of heat treatment, and you end up with a 60 Rockwell 1095 blade with a very narrow tang coming along here, you're going to be cracking that blade. You're going to be breaking the blade. The Glock knives are so tough because they've been heat treated so as to be that way. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. The same that will break, sometimes catastrophically so, in some other knives, in the Glock will withstand that because it's been heat treated so as to be soft. And I say that, you know, with a quotation marks, because it's really not soft at all. It's more than adequate enough for more of the cutting tasks. Yeah, you will notice that, you know, if you have a better steel, one of these super steels, and it's heat treated to 61, 62 Rockwell, or even, you know, something like my own knife, the Boiler N680 steel. Is this going to be cutting a lot more than your 1095? Sure. Is it going to be cutting a lot more before it needs to be sharpened again than at 1095 heat treated to 55 Rockwell? Of course. This is noticeably, you see that, yeah, you use it, it cuts perfectly well, but you end up sharpening quite often. It's not a deal breaker for me because I love knives, because I love sharpening knives, and I know how to sharpen them. So for me, it's actually a bit of, it's the romantic thing of, yeah, I just like my knives, I like sharpening them and, keeping them in good condition and so on. It's for those that are, fans of tools like these, we don't mind doing that sort of thing. But yeah, you're going to be sharpening a little bit more often. But if this is not the same steel and it's not heat treated in the same way, this will be a breaking point for you in your counterfeit Glock knife, okay? I hope I answered that question. Now, in terms of how the edge should be, well, the edge in your Glock is going to be looking a little bit like this. Pretty much all of the Glock knives that I have, and I have a few, they pretty much look the same way. You see how that is, like a little secondary bevel there. Okay, it's just a micro bevel. I don't know if it's that micro, but it's definitely a secondary bevel besides the main flat that it has on both sides, and that's something that you see in pretty much all of the Glock knives that I have. There are some that are a little bit more noticeable than others, but basically this is the way that it looks. Now when I sharpen it myself, I give it a little bit more of an angle, and yes, this is more noticeable, okay? And yes, this is going to be sharper. It's going to be cutting better. And yeah, it's going to be cutting better, and the edge is going to be lasting actually more. It's not that reducing the angle makes the edge last less. It's actually the opposite. It will cut better and will cut for more time, but it's going to be a slightly more delicate edge than the steeper angle that you have here. And your typical Glock knife will somewhat cut like this. I've had some that were better than others. Sometimes they're not really all that razor sharp. This one maybe is the closest to the original. I probably sharpened that one, I already forgot, but this is somewhat similar to the typical edge that you get on your stock Glock knife. Now, it may look like this, and when you try cutting, it may not cut paper. I mean, it's not all that common, but in one of the knives that I got from Glock, it would not cut paper properly, because even though it looked very similar, it was just one little hair away from being, you know, those sides meeting correctly and being as sharp as it was supposed to be. Okay, so it may be an original Glock knife that looks very much like this one, but when you try to cut paper, it's not cutting. Glock does not obsess over sending their knives out into the world with the kind of edge that you get from maybe a Mora. I haven't had a single Mora knife in my life that was an insane razor sharp out of the box, or out of the, you know, sheath, because sometimes they don't even come with a box. Okay, but all of the Mora knives, razor sharp. Glock, usually they're sharp enough. Sometimes you may come across one that is not much sharp, or even really not sharp enough to cut paper, and that's not a deal breaker, because it's a military style knife. It's intended for poking, cutting, and, you know, yeah, a knife that doesn't cut, really, that kind of sucks. But I had one Glock that was not, you know, it would not slice through paper. Probably if you pushed it enough against something that you really want to cut, it would get the job done. But it's not the same amount of detail that goes into the edge of a Mora or some other knives, okay? Guys, I hope I answered that question regarding Glock knives. And if you're interested in survival preparedness, you have my book, Street Survival Skills, the basic stuff that you should know so as to have the skills to survive in the modern world, especially with everything going on these days. And of course, giving everything going on with the economy, surviving the economic collapse, my book with over 1,000 reviews in Amazon. Thanks to you guys that took the time to leave that. Much appreciated. See you in our next video, folks. Take care.